Item number 2 relates to Colin Kaepernick. Pete Carroll, the coach of the Seahawks, the only team of the 32 that at any point over the last 3+ years has actually brought in Colin Kaepernick for a visit, and they decided not to sign him. They're the only ones who did it. The issue came up yesterday when Pete Carroll spoke to the media. It's a fairly long chunk of what he had to say, but it's important. Here's Pete Carroll talking about the status of Colin Kaepernick.
Cap called me during the season, before that offseason, and he had called out of the blue to ask me, for some advice about where he would go next. I was flattered that he would even think to call me because we had never talked before that I could, other than just greetings, and so from that point I was kind of rooting for him, and hoping that things would work out. And so when it came back around, and I forgot about it, but when it came back around and we had a chance to visit him, and it came up, I was thinking, okay, this is an incredible football player. Let's find out if it could possibly fit football-wise and all of that. And then also, because he hadn't visited anywhere yet, maybe this would help him, open up doors for him if our thing didn't work out. And we had great meetings. I don't know that I've ever explained it in as much depth, but we spent half a day together. He spent time with our people throughout the building, and almost a full day. And he was awesome. He just backed up even more of the play that we had seen in the character and in his smarts and his togetherness and his competitiveness, to the point where it was so obvious that he's a starter in the NFL that this, it was just, that's what I think I eventually wound up answering to you guys, saying to you guys that he's a dominant figure as a football player, and that's how we saw him. And the fact that it didn't work out, for us, I figured he's going to wind up starting somewhere for sure, and it just didn't happen. So the rest of that story is one that I regret that didn't happen in some fashion. I wish we would have contributed to it because the guy deserved to play. I thought at the time, in our situation as a backup, man, I didn't feel it was right at that time. So I had to make that football decision. It was about our team and the situation. We had our starting quarterback and all of that. And it wasn't going to be the open competitive situation that I'd like to think all of our spots are, because Russ was such a dominant figure and all that. So anyway, that's what happened. And I wish people had called me during the time before we ever got him in and say, hey, he'd be great in your program. He may not be able to play here or there, but he certainly could play for you. I agreed with that. He could play for us. He could have been a fantastic player in our program. Unfortunately, it just didn't work out. And then when you look back, I felt like we missed the opportunity. And so as I look back at it, I wish we could have figured it out and known what we know now and given him the chance, because I would love to see him play football those years.
I appreciate the candor from Pete Carroll very much, Shireen, and I respect Pete Carroll as one of the best coaches in the National Football League. I still have trouble 3 years later reconciling that competition vibe that he constantly has with turning away someone who would come in and at a minimum maybe push Russell Wilson to reach an even higher level. I think there was a deeper concern because of some of the guys still on the roster in 2017 who resent Russell Wilson, that one false move in practice, one false move in a game, and there was going to be a groundswell in the locker room to put Colin Kaepernick on the field, not just on the roster. Be that as it may, it's a strong endorsement of Colin Kaepernick from Pete Carroll at a time when it's not going away. This is action item number 2. As Al Sharpton said the other day, Colin Kaepernick must be repaired. He has been damaged by the deliberate actions of the NFL to freeze him out because he's the one that made all the other players aware that they have the power to kneel during the anthem. He's the man who is most identified with the movement. He's the man who has caused the biggest headache for the NFL, and they have frozen him out, and everyone knows it. And this conversation with Pete Carroll from yesterday between him and the reporters, maybe that begins the process of freezing or unfreezing the ice.
Mike, I listened to that whole press conference yesterday, and let me start with, I thought Jimbo Fisher talked fast. Oh, my goodness. Try to transcribe what you just watched. It was pretty difficult. And that was just one answer of several questions about Colin Kaepernick. I mean, he spent probably 4 or 5 different questions being quizzed about Colin Kaepernick, including, would you sign him this year? Would you be open to that? And, he kind of talked around that one. But there was a lot of conversation about Colin Kaepernick during that hour-long press conference, a big chunk of it was about Colin Kaepernick. And the endorsement from Pete Carroll is great, but somebody's got to step up and sign him. Now, Pete Carroll did say that he got a phone call yesterday from a team interested in Colin Kaepernick. They wanted to ask, how did the visit go when he visited there? Of course, the only visit that Colin Kaepernick has had. How did that visit go? And Pete Carroll gave him a glowing seal of approval. So it sounds like one team is interested in signing Colin Kaepernick. That whoever that one team is or whatever team is interested needs to step up and do that. Have they called the agent? We don't know that.
I want to hear that directly from Pete Carroll because I haven't heard the answer. We haven't. I want to scrutinize exactly what he said here because, look, I'm always a little skeptical. I'm always a little cynical. I want to hear what Carroll said about a potentially interested team. Here's the clip from yesterday's video conference with reporters.
After all of the time that, the years that have passed, I never received a phone call about him. I never talked to another head coach about it. I never talked to anybody about it until today. I got a phone call today. I'm going to tell you who it was. But I got a phone call today in asking, inquiring about the situation. So I know, somebody's interested, and he, so we'll see what happens with that. I thought that was the irony of that was crazy because I knew I was coming on your press conference. You guys are going to ask me a million questions about this today. I got a phone call today for the first time.
All right, I believe him. I believe him. I mean, part of me thought maybe he's just going to throw that out there to try to pull the cord on the lawnmower and get somebody interested. I believe him. I believe somebody called him, and I believe somebody is at least doing their due diligence. Now, I'd like to know, does that due diligence include contacting Kaepernick's agent, contacting Kaepernick directly, having a telephone conversation? He's a free agent. You can do whatever you want. You can talk to him. You can bring him in. You can do whatever you want by way of doing your homework on Colin Kaepernick. And is there trepidation that if somebody directly reaches out to Colin Kaepernick, it's going to leak out? And I think that has been one of the reasons why teams have shied away. And again, the world has changed. There should be evidence of this awakening that the world has changed. And something I said earlier in the week, the things that previously would paralyze teams, the fear of alienating a segment of the fan base because, God forbid, you're just considering Colin Kaepernick, that needs to go away. I want to see a greater conviction, a greater resolve, and actual courage from these teams to do the right thing and not say, well, we can't make it look like we're interested in Colin Kaepernick because we don't want to get a bunch of nasty emails and Twitter messages from our fan base that doesn't like it. You just need to do it. If you think it's right for your team, if you think it potentially makes your team better, you do it. And the hell with anyone who doesn't like it, Shireen.
Yeah, and I think, again, Mike, you pointed this out. Times have changed, and it does feel different. And I don't know that there's going to be protest, and there'll be some of that probably, and there'll be some people who will say, I'm never watching an NFL game again. I'm never watching X team's game again. I'm not supporting X team. I'm burning my jersey. There'll be some of that. But I do think this feels different, and I do think if a team signs Colin Kaepernick, I don't think it's going to be what it would have been maybe even a year ago. I think this is different, and if a team signs him, I think he's going to come in and he's going to eventually, after a week or so, be another player on the roster and not just be Colin Kaepernick, this guy who's going to cause dissension on your team. I don't think that's what it's going to be. So a team needs to have that feeling that they can sign him and things are going to go well. And I don't know that a starting quarterback is going to be looking over his shoulder. This guy hasn't played since 2016. It's going to take him time when he gets back in the league to get back to the level that we remember Colin Kaepernick, if he can get back to that level. We don't know any of that. We don't know what kind of shape he's in. We think he is. He says he's been practicing, but there's a difference between practicing and throwing to guys and playing on a football team and practicing every day and playing games. And he just hadn't done it since 2016.
And there has to be the willingness on one hand to do the due diligence, bring him in, and if somebody doesn't like it, that's their problem. And then there has to be a willingness to cut him or not sign him if you don't like what you saw at the workout. But I think the standard needs to be relaxed. This is part of the effort to repair Colin Kaepernick, acknowledging that he's been out of it for 3 years, through no fault of his own. I mean, Mike Vick was gone for 2 years for something he did and should have been gone for 2 years, and some would say maybe even longer when you consider he could have been prosecuted in Virginia for actually killing the dogs that were deemed unfit to eventually compete in dogfighting operations. And the Eagles found a spot for him, and the Eagles gave him that kind of transition year before they moved on from Donovan McNabb and let Mike Vick compete to be the starter. So if you can do it for a guy who was out for 2 years because of something he did, you can do it for a guy who was out for 3 years for something that isn't his fault, for something that is the fault of the league for collectively freezing him out. And, whoever would have a problem with Colin Kaepernick coming back to the NFL, those people can huff and puff all they want. A lot of times they huff and puff and they won't blow your house down. I'm never watching NFL again. When's the next game on? The other thing, too, is part of the conviction and the courage and the resolve I want to see from the owners is to say, you know what? We don't want you. If this is the way you are, if this is who you are, if this is how you are, if you are part of the problem in this country, we don't want your money. We don't want your time. Go do something else. Get out of here. Right? That's part of what I think needs to be conveyed in this moment. If the fringe that doesn't see things the way that everyone else is seeing it, and that hasn't had this awakening, that now is the time for true equality, now is the time to understand what the message was and not complain about the method, but understand the method and what it meant to Colin Kaepernick to be the person who sent that message. I think the NFL's attitude should be, we don't want your money, we don't want your time, we don't want your fandom, go do something else.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.